So it's so good to see. I'm glad you could get here. You've been busy. You were in Europe and all that sort of thing. You've been really busy, and the scoop is really good.
Thank you.
And in the audience, welcome very, very much to Conversations. Very, very pleased I am to have as our guest on this section Lucy Commissar. She's been a guest many times in the past on Conversations, and I would say, in terms of very important issues of that affect the economy and the economic system, she's probably the very best investigative reporter in that we have currently on this planet, in my humble opinion. And we're going to be talking about a number of the things she's been doing. And Lucy, so good to see you.
Thank you. It's
Welcome
my pleasure.
again. We're going to talk about some of the specific programs about the Scoop and all the things you've been up to since last we spoke. But we made a note of the fact that this is now October 29th, 2009, and it is to the day, it's Black Tuesday. It happened to be October 29th of 1929 was the darkest day of the Depression era collapse of the stock market back in 1929. That happened to be a Tuesday. We're recording on a Thursday, but it's 80 years ago to the day, so that may be a harbinger of something that we could have in the back of our minds as we do this. Welcome. It's so good to see you. Share a little bit of your background, if you would, please. We're going to talk about some of the specific things that you have up now, but you've been into this idea of investigating tax havens and these kind of things for a very long time, off a long career of having been involved in civil rights and all that sort of thing. But could you just go, like, in a very thumbnail way, your background, and then we'll talk about specifically the Commissar Scoop and some of the specific stories that are on there. But if you could, please.
I started doing investigative journalism on this subject, the whole area of offshore bank and corporate secrecy, in 1997.
Okay.
And that is because I had been writing about developing countries, efforts at democratization, efforts at changing the poverty of those countries. And I found that when I went to places, in fact, I did go to Haiti and to Zaire and to the Philippines, the oppositions there all said to me, the dictator has looted the country, stolen everything, and it's in Swiss banks. And that was Duvalier and Mobutu and Marcos. I thought, what is this about the Swiss banks?
Right.
I began looking into it and discovered that there was an international financial system run by the big international banks that was used by dictators and other corrupt characters around the world to loot their countries. And these banks helped them hide their money because the banks made a lot of money off this service. And I started to get very interested in that. And as I dug further, I was quite astonished to see how central it was to the international financial system.
As a whole, not only just the dictators, but as a whole.
As a whole.
It was systemic.
It's why major corporations, on the whole, pay minimal taxes, in spite of how many complaints they may make. They move their operations through offshore centers. They launder their profits through transfer pricing. Very rich people cheat on their taxes. Arms trafficking, people trafficking, drug trafficking.
Drug trafficking
all
also,
use this system. Drug trafficking is turning Mexico into a failed state, and it is threatening the South and the rest of the United States, particularly the borders with Mexico. The crime is spilling over in a terrific way.
It's very interesting to me that you came to this by being concerned with some of the least among us in terms of the human society. That's been your proclivity for a very long time. You're concerned not just with trying to cotton up or cater up to the well-to-do. You're interested in some of the people that are least advantaged and all the things that is big time systemic problems that exist within the world economy.
But we find that if we have a global economy, that what affects the very poorest also may affect those who are much wealthier. Look at the Allen Stanford case.
Yes.
I got interested in that because Allen Stanford set up his operation in Antigua, which is an offshore bank and corporate secrecy haven. And as I did investigation into that, and this story was published by the Miami Herald July 5th.
Major newspaper,
Together, I brought them the story, and they put two of their very good reporters on it to work on it with me after I I gave them a big part of it, and they were able, with their local contacts, to bring it forward.
Could I give a quick plug to the Commissar Scoop, where you're doing most of your publishing
Well,
now?
it's
one of the richest sites in the universe that deals with these issues, and that's the site that you developed over the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, and
it's really good. Really good. Yeah.
If I have something that's published someplace else, I put a copy of it there, and sometimes I have something that somebody else is not publishing, and I can tell you about some of that, and then I just publish it myself.
Yeah.
In this case, I discovered...
The Stanford place.
Well, the Stanford, that was published in Miami Herald.
Okay.
I discovered a memo, a 1998 memo, which was written, an internal memo in the Florida Banking Department, where the chief lawyer for the banking department says he doesn't like a deal that looks like they are going to agree to. They are going to allow Alan Stanford to set up an office of his trust company in Miami, and they're going to allow it to move money without any regulation, without any control. We have money laundering controls. There's a lot of reporting required by financial institutions. They were going to let him set this up, and one person in the office protested and said it's illegal. I got this memo.
Okay, hold it up to, let me hold it. Now, this is a memo, and the thing she wants you to see, if you get a chance, you could just come in.
It does say...
It says confidential, and that's what you wanted to make the point, right?
Yes, this was a confidential memo, which
Have they been able to see that then?
I got through the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay, let me give it back to you so you can go into some of the details.
And it was discussing what became a memorandum of understanding. And I got a copy of that too through the Freedom of Information Act. And that said, as a convenience for customers only, they were going to allow this office forwarding money or securities to Stanford trust offices located outside the state of Florida and receiving money or securities for customers from Stanford trust offices located outside the state of Florida was to be permitted. This is in their memorandum of understanding. This was an unregulated office. This Florida banking office, now it's a financial regulations office, they were allowing Stanford to move money in the memorandum of understanding that they signed, ignoring the internal in this is by David Burgess, who was the bureau chief of international banking, and he is still with the Florida Office of Financial Regulation. His last paragraph says that, strictly speaking, this trust office could not be established by the trust company. But, he said, if we want to make a policy decision to permit such an arrangement, perhaps the definition of trust company can be stretched to include offshore trust companies. Well, stretched. They were breaking the law. It's now under investigation as a result of the story that I...
Then you brought that to light.
I brought that to light.
Good for you, yeah.
But other publications, other major publications, were not interested in this. The Miami Herald, I must say, to their credit, was interested in this story, and you have not seen this story picked up by any other major organization.
News organization.
I saw some references to it on some websites and some commentary. It should have been on the front pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. It is nowhere. Unless you read the Miami Herald, and there were some good follow-up stories that my colleagues there did, you would not know about this, and you would not know what this office had done. Okay,
now that's a specific instance, the case that you're doing. But is it unusual? Is it unusual that they broke the law and the people that were involved there, or is there money laundering going on in a more routine kind of way, so that this would be seen as one example of a systemic problem that confronts the whole international financial arrangement? It's systemic in different ways. Okay. Usually you do not get a state agency. Such a letter like that. You don't get a state agency saying you're going to be doing this. And they knew, when I interviewed
Richard Donnellan is the man who was against this. He's no longer with that agency. He's with another Florida government office.
Right.
When I talked to him, he said, I told him it was against the law. You couldn't do that. He said, you can't treat this office as if it is selling shoes or ice cream. They just said, just set up your office. You're allowed to move money offshore, bring money in from offshore, securities. We have national regulation.
National and international?
Well, in this country, we have national regulation and state regulation. If you're a financial institution, you can't just do this. You can't just move money with no control, no regulation. And Florida allowed this to happen. Now, Stanford cheated people of about $7 billion through his Ponzi scheme, it is believed. He was selling phony CDs, certificates of deposit.
Yeah.
This one office moved over $600,000 worth of CDs and had over 2,000 people as clients. And these are people that, many of them lived in Florida, that the Florida government was not protecting.
What does it tell us that this Florida agency based and so forth went through this procedure with that? What does it tell us about the larger picture?
Well,
or the picture, and then maybe the larger
well,
picture.
it tells us that there's a lot of flaws in regulation. Now, interesting, Stanford, through his lawyers, went to Texas. He wanted to set up the same operation in Texas. The Texas Banking Regulation Office, this was a year or so after he did it in Florida, said...
When did he do it in Florida?
It was, well, this was in about 98.
Okay.
The memos,
about 10 years ago,
yeah, the memorandum of understandings from 98. He went to Texas a few years later. Texas said no. Texas said he could open an information office, a marketing office. He could not move money. And that was a very good thing.
Why did he have to go to Texas? Why couldn't he have done it all through his Miami office?
Well, because he wanted to do a lot of marketing in different places.
Right?
He wanted to expand his offices,
right.
the way banks often want to expand their offices. But Texas had the good sense to see through what he was trying to do.
You think he had to bribe people, if that's the right term, back in the Florida situation?
I don't know.
Or buy his way in, or is that involved?
I think they're investigating. The person who signed off on this is Art Simon. He, for 12 years, had been a member of the Florida state legislature, and he had written banking legislation. He was no dummy. Now he's a professor at the University of Miami. And
has he commented on this
at
all?
Well, first he wouldn't talk to me. Then when the Miami Herald got involved, he said, well, I made a mistake.
Oh, he put it off to a mistake.
He made a mistake. He now says he made a mistake. After this memo from Donnellan is telling the agency, I'm sorry, it's a memo from David Burgess, but he's including the comments from Donnellan, who was the lawyer, of course, saying you can't do this. And Art Simon, who is a former member of the state legislature, a lawyer, a person who had written banking legislation. Are you telling me he doesn't understand what's going on? I think he did understand what was going on.
Right, okay.
I don't know why he did it. I think the investigators will find that out.
This is one instance of it. I saw, among other things, that our President Obama has said, among other things that he's announced, that he wants to try and close the international banking havens, and that's Cayman Islands, that sort of thing. But that is going on, apart from Mr. Stanford's effort. I mean, that's going on in a larger scale, in a systemic way, and you're keeping track of that. But this is one that you were able to find evidence that would really make it would give an example that would inform us about the overall system.
That's right, because Stanford had been at Montserrat before, another tax haven, and they had actually thrown him out because what he was doing was so dicey. So anybody that did due diligence on Stanford would find out that he'd been thrown out of Montserrat, his operation. So then he set it up in Antigua, and he bribed people there. It's now known that the guy who was the chief of the agency that had to give him various permissions now, I believe, has been fired, but he was being bribed by Stanford. So the guy, but these are just this is an island, one island, Antigua, and there are about 70 of them around the world.
Caymans come to mind.
And the Caymans, of course.
Yeah. And it's over in Isle of Man, I think.
And now. The Isle of Man.
And the Jersey Island.
And Jersey.
And it's going on. And that's what I'm trying to get at in a certain sense. You got one example here of somebody who's doing it, maybe pushing the envelope, he got exposed in a way or something. But it seems to be, and Mr. Obama referring to it, it seemed to me, he said, we're going to close the taxi. But it's been going on for a rather long period of time without criticism of it systemically by the political people or by the investigative journalists and so forth. It goes on as a way of avoiding taxes and all these things you laid out, and that's been with us for quite a long period of time.
Yes.
A way of doing business in the mind of the
decades.
business financial leaders.
Yeah, and the problem with what Obama is doing, and he's doing more than anybody did in the past, give him credit for that, but he's not addressing it systemically.
Okay.
They need to close the system down. What they've done through the OECD is say that
OECD?
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that includes about 30 countries that are considered the major industrial countries.
Right, okay.
And at the G20 meeting last spring, they agreed to go by some standards to accept. They recognized they couldn't accept them because the Chinese wouldn't agree to that because it's not part of the OECD. So using the diplomatic language, they recognized the OECD standard, which is that a country, to get off the blacklist, had to sign agreements for cooperation with 12 other countries. Well, they didn't say which other countries. So some of these places started signing them with Greenland and Iceland and all of these very important countries with huge amounts of financial operations. It's a joke. And the other part of it is that the countries can set standards for cooperation, and what they're doing, what Switzerland is doing, is you have to bring information that shows that you have grounds to believe that something funny is going on using an account.
Okay,
but wait a minute.
Go ahead, sorry.
What they're looking for when they ask for cooperation is just that information. They are asking for the evidence. And if the country that's looking for the information already had the evidence, they wouldn't need Switzerland. So it's a catch-22, and they're setting it up so that they can say no to everybody. They're also, and this has already happened, Switzerland is telling some of the objects of the searches that their accounts have been requested. Well, these people have every opportunity now to move their money someplace else.
Yeah, and Switzerland is the granddaddy of the private account, numbered accounts and that sort of thing, where a lot of those dictators sent their money because they were protected.
That's right.
And that was one of the advantages Switzerland has, and all these others. So, but that's been operative for a long time.
Yes, decades, at least and so 60s, 70s. Drug traffickers used it. Meyer Lansky, when he got into trouble, because of Al Capone getting into trouble on his taxes, Meyer Lansky set up a bank in Switzerland, and the money, the gambling and prostitution money from places, the Batista era Cuba, that went to Switzerland and got laundered in Switzerland. That's why, money laundering is to. Al Capone couldn't show where he got his money from. If he had said all these millions,
racket or something,
can't say that. It's illegal. If he had said, I have a hotel in Switzerland, or I am running a factory in
producing widgets,
wherever, and that's where I'm getting this money from.
And then reports to show that.
That's right. So that was what laundering was. They would, maybe nobody would ever come into this hotel. Maybe they never really made a widget, but they would have books to show. This is my money, and I'm paying taxes on it. Now, these guys really wanted to pay taxes because that would
make them legitimate.
That's right.
Yeah, right. I see. That's the thing. You said earlier in a sentence, you said they want to shut the system down, or address it systemically. And when you say the system, or maybe I didn't hear you right, are you talking about the way in which financial arrangements are negotiated and carried out on planet Earth, or what are you talking about when you say they shut it down?
Well, I mean, the U.S. Treasury Department, and this was a power it has under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Oh, right,
That was post 9/11. They are allowed to shut down, to not allow American banks to do business, meaning do transfers of money, any kind of business, with either particular banks or banks in venues that could be a threat. So they have used this
to
the terrorists, yes, to our security.
Terrorists. Okay,
they've done this.
That's a new
they've done this in Syria, a bank in Syria.
Okay.
In Iran, a bank in Macau that was linked to money from North Korea. So they can do it. They could say
it's political.
They could say it's a threat to our security to have banks that are laundering money or hiding the money of tax evaders, and we will not allow American banks to do business with any bank in a secrecy jurisdiction that allows that. And they would, in a day, shut it down in a day. Look at UBS, the whole system.
If they took that, then the whole system, and then they got this thing too big to fail.
Yeah.
Too important. There's too much financial going on in a globalized world. It's working. They grease the wheels. There's, and they understand it and everything. And it's not ethical, but it is something that's in place. It's convenient, and so they just keep it going, and they put money in the pocket of Congress people who make sure that nothing like that comes up. But you're trying to bring it up at that systemic level.
That's right.
By some of these examples.
That's right. And there are some good people in Congress, such as Senator Carl Levin, that is pushing legislation to expand on what the Obama administration wants to do.
Gonzalez used to be good on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was just the beginning.
Right.
But he was dealing with some of this. Particularly, he was concerned, being from Texas, about the drug trade, because the drug people, they run all their money through these hidden accounts.
And those are big numbers.
Very big numbers.
Drugs are really big, and then they also are avoiding taxes, right?
And yes.
Okay. So it's a disgrace. It's a sort of open secret in a sense that these things exist. And you're bringing some examples where there's an overly egregious violation of it that sort of pops up out of the general acceptance of this as part of doing business as normal.
Yes.
And that the doing business as normal might be addressed.
Yes.
Because it's not, and it's not good for the people, including the people even in the developed world, much less the underdeveloped world, to have such a system where the people who are running things at that level can operate in a way where they gain for themselves and it doesn't help the people.
Well, look at Stanford.
Right?
The people that had the money to buy CDs, those were not poor people.
Or the people that dealt with Madoff?
And they were not,
they're not poor.
Those are not
they
poor
don't
people.
care about poor people.
Therefore, so the people with money are also scammed by these offshore fraudsters. So they should care about it.
Would you have market fundamentalists who say, well, then that will find its way, just keep your hands off government, the market will find its way, and the one, you don't understand that argument would come from the right wing.
To the seller, and that makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. They're quite willing to take money from the government, but they don't want to have any control. And now we see
from the government.
And now we see that market fundamentalism is a total disaster.
It is, isn't it? It has come to a pretty pass, and we got this awful thing of September 20th through 2008. Mr. Paulson came in and said, it's all falling apart if you don't sign this 3-page thing that everybody in the government has to do and get on the president's desk within a week. That's going to change everything, and we're going through that now and everything. And this is all part of what led up to that. And a lot of it's to avoid taxes?
A lot of it is for that, yes.
Yeah. What do they say? Would there be people in that realm who would say, well, we're just trying to avoid taxes because you've got this overweening government here taking all our well-won profits, and it's not right. The general thing against taxing the people, which means taxing those who have wealth, and that they took in the time of Eisenhower was up to 90% of money was able to be subject to tax in various ways. Reagan comes in, it gets down to 35% or something. So they
still don't want to pay it, though.
They try to say it's coming from the middle class, but it's really coming from the wealthy in a way of distributing through governmental efforts something to the folks.
I mean, they don't mind making their money in this country and using the people who are educated in free education in this country. They don't mind using the system of transportation that is paid for by this country. If they really don't like paying the taxes in this country, why don't they all go someplace else and put their factories in Burkina Faso?
Well, aren't a lot of them going to China and other places?
Some are going to China. some are going to.
Manufacturing is there? Do we manufacture much of anything anymore in the United States? It seems to me, I just at a gross level looking at.
But I mean, the money comes back to the owners now, which are disparate because they're all over the world through stock companies. But the major executives of these countries have not moved out of Park Avenue.
Do you think anybody's going to be able to do anything about this? It's been around for so long. It began with Switzerland, I guess, and it's been around. I was it with the bankers out of Venice back hundreds of years when they first got going and everything. But it's been around. Is there a chance of being able to address this systemically? Is there any chance they could get at this as a systemic problem by the attitude of Mr. Obama and company, who doesn't seem to address in a fundamental way the basic premises by which the American economy is to be organized, listening to Mr. Sumner, Mr. Geithner, and that kind of thing? What's your sense of confidence they're going to be able to come to an appropriate realization of regulation and government oversight of the international financial community? It doesn't seem to me they've made many changes in terms of the overall organization of the economy.
If you ask me that after they come to a conclusion about the reform of the financial system itself, the stock market system, and the general financial system, I'd be better able to tell you what they're going to do on this other question. It could be that they're just biting off one thing at a time, and they plan to do that afterwards. But I'm not at the center of that.
You're not at the center of that larger issue. Although those things that you're dealing with do relate to those larger issues because it is systemic.
That's true.
They are part of the overall problem.
That's true, but I'm not sitting I'm not a fly on the wall in the strategy meetings where they discuss what they're going to do about it.
Would you like to be?
Well, I mean,
in on the inner sanctum of the people who are really doing it. And do you have confidence in the Mr. Sumner and company and so forth, who are the stock market seems to be up to 10,000 again and everything?
I don't much like Geithner, and I don't much like Summers. They were the people that were behind the deregulation that led to this crash.
Right. And what was that thing that was there? The Glass-Steagall or
the Glass.
That thing which they did in '99. It was Clinton who did that. They did away from the commercial banking and the investment banking and that kind of thing, and made a change and everything. And so it seems to be it's not just it's not. It's the system, and it's coming. Now, you've been investigating this specific examples, which you do, like Mr. Stanford and others. And you put it in this thing. I'm going to plug it again if you don't mind.
The Commissar Scoop.
The Commissar Scoop. TheKommissarScoop.com.
Now, Harold,
is a place to go for investigative following of these issues at the very cutting edge of relevancy in terms of improving the human condition.
There's another story.
And this is the person who's responsible for that. It's really well put together.
Thank you. There's another story that we should talk about because it's suddenly in the news in a funny way.
Okay.
People have read in the papers and seen on television, especially if they're in the Boston area, that 2 days ago, Tuesday, a 35-year-old guy went to his psychiatrist's office and stabbed her, and an off-duty security guard was there and shot him dead. That person was Jay Carciero.
Is that did I got a picture of him or no?
Yes, you do.
I'll dig it out. You talk.
And
I'll get the picture.
He was one of the people involved in a story that I had published in March.
Let me show a picture so we'll get a graphic. Keep talking over the picture. Yeah, this is the fellow you're talking about.
This was my story was called Cafeteria Kickbacks. You can see it on my website.
Yes, on the Scoop. Yeah.
On the Scoop, and it was published in these times, and it was supported by a generous grant from the Nation Institute.
Good. Good.
And this Cafeteria Kickbacks is about the system of in this case, Sodexo, which runs cafeterias around the country, and which Jay Carciero worked for. He worked in Leahy Clinic Hospital in Peabody, Massachusetts. He was in charge of, for Sodexo, the on-site Sodexo person working in the hospital for their food service. And Sodexo and several other countries, if you go to a cafeteria in a hospital or a college, school, in a business, even in government agencies, in the FBI, they run the cafeteria in the FBI. They run cafeteria in for CNN. Because most
That's big business.
They
yeah.
are
huge. Yeah.
20 billion across the world in 80 different countries. They have over 300,000 people working for them.
Wow.
And
wow.
what I learned from Jay,
300,000
around the world.
Wow. Okay.
They make their revenues are 7 billion in the U.S. And or North America, I think is the way they put it.
Yeah.
They make their profits, he said, and the documents that I saw from kickbacks.
Yeah. Documents, you use that term? Not that term, surely.
Well, I mean, the documents I saw prove, and I got what I got from Jay and his brother John. They had internal documents from the company where the president of the company and other top officials are telling their salespeople that these rebates, they call them rebates.
Rebates or arrangements.
Rebates.
There'd be a word that probably wasn't a kickback.
Volume
Kick
discounts.
them in the teeth if they don't do it. Yeah.
They're volume discounts, they're rebates.
Yeah.
They are kickbacks. And what it means...
For kickbacks.
Yes,
yeah.
it means that if you're Sodexo, you're running the school cafeteria or the hospital cafeteria, and you have a choice of where you're getting chicken from or hamburger from or something.
Big contracts.
You get it from the big companies, the very large companies.
That wouldn't be one of our
Tyson or Heinz or Pepsi-Cola that will give you kickbacks on and even an international basis.
Same sort of thing that McDonald's or one of the chain fast food places would do.
Well, I haven't looked into that, so I don't want to talk about
what
I don't
understand.
know. But
I'm just saying, yeah, okay. Right.
So what happens is, say you're running a cafeteria in some local community, and there's a farm there, and the farmer maybe grows string beans or lettuce or something.
Yes.
You cannot buy and support your local community farm. Or maybe there's somebody
like Walmart
who makes ice cream or produces something. You cannot support your local supplier.
It wouldn't fit into the algorithms, the pattern that's managing the whole thing in the computer.
They can't pay the kickbacks.
Yeah.
And
kickbacks?
Well, they're kickbacks.
Arrangements.
The arrangements.
Suppliers.
They can't. What happens is they pay. Suppose they pay $10 for something, for 10 pounds of hamburger.
Yeah.
And they give the invoice to the hospital or the school or the office, and the contract usually is cost plus. So
what does that
cost
mean?
plus means you get the invoice, this much food. You have bought this much food, and it costs this much, and therefore, in addition to whatever management fee there is, you pay me 1 or 2% of the cost of the food.
That's a margin of profit or something?
Well, that's in addition, that's part of their profit arrangement.
Okay.
Now, suppose instead of paying $10 for this beef, you really paid $9 because you paid $10, you got an invoice which you passed on to your client, but then you got a margin, what do they call it, a volume discount, it's a kickback, from the company. So you only paid $9.
Does Walmart do the same kind of thing in marketing?
I don't know. Yeah. I can only tell you, I only like to talk about what I really know
about.
Right,
I know that. You
and
really
I have
research.
the documents that show this. And so they did this not only for suppliers, but for people who are repairing the roof, for example.
Okay.
And I talked to some of these people. I talked to a guy that was selling ice cream. He said they wanted 10%. This used to be run, before Sodexo, it was run by the PTA, and they made profit, and they used it to buy equipment for the school. Now they can't do that. The kids don't get anything. And he said, I can't sell them ice cream because if they take 10% off my profit, I'm hardly left with anything.
I see, yeah.
And I talked to another guy who said, suppose a produce guy, also this was in that area because these brothers were working in New England.
Right.
Say I sell a carton of apples for $20.
Okay.
But Sodexo wants a 10-15% rebate, meaning a kickback.
So therefore, because of the massive contract.
Therefore, I have to sell it for $23 a bucket.
There goes all your
and then
margin of
no worse than
survival,
that. Then the school administrator or whoever is running the cafeteria for
Yeah.
the school
Uh-huh.
says, well, I can't do that in the budget. This is the local guy.
Right.
I can't do that. So instead of buying fresh apples from the local guy, because Sodexo has priced them out, they'll buy some package thing from one of the big
suppliers.
one of the huge suppliers.
Is that a generic problem to a thing like Walmart moves in? Now,
I
you don't want to talk about that,
Walmart.
but is it characteristic of a free market view
I don't know.
that you get great economies of scale and you get great advantages by being too big to fail? Which
well,
you're
not
getting
getting well the
economy.
economy.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but this
Yeah.
is an economy for the client because
Yeah.
they're paying more. It has to do with the monopoly
Yeah.
that can jack the prices
Right,
up. And in this
monopoly, yeah.
case, there are two other companies like Sodexo in the U.S., Compass and Aramark.
Those are
and
the biggies, huh?
And I can't speak for their practices because I
Right.
didn't investigate
You
them.
didn't investigate
But
one to one.
basically, companies, clients, schools, hospitals get from one of these three. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a similar policy, but I don't want to speak about that. Just Sodexo.
You don't like to talk about things you don't know.
No, you can't do
Good
that.
for you. That's really good. You check your sources, and if it's in the commissar's scoop, it's got to be good.
So what
Sorry.
happened was Jay and John Carciero, they were working at different hospitals, but both for Sodexo. And one was Leahy Clinic, that was Jay, and then Melrose, and then Lowell General Hospital, that was John. They saw the same thing going on. They started to protest to the company in about 2005 or so and say, this is not right.
Did you pick up on it then?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
After I
Little.
found out
Yeah.
what was going on, they gave me the emails that they had saved, which showed all of their protest and the
So
responses
there's
they
some
got from.
camaraderie among investigative people in these matters.
Well, I mean, the two sources were the brothers, and they found out about through somebody who told them that I was an investigative reporter. I got in contact with them.
Now, do you have people? We'll get back to it. I don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But I mean, what about in the larger journalistic community, Bloomberg people and the people who report for ABC News and Business, Financial Times and all that? Is there camaraderie on that investigative side of things, or are they all, what is the word, sucking up to the people with the clout and
that
the
I don't
power
know.
and closing their eyes and that?
Well, I tried to sell this to the Wall Street Journal, this story of the kickbacks of
How did
Sodexo.
they treat you?
Uninterested.
Uninterested.
And I tried to sell this to some other major places as well.
Have you been able to sell it in any of the The Economist or Wall Street
No,
Journal?
I sold it in These Times, which is
in These Times of the Nation, yeah.
Nation wasn't interested.
They were not
Small
interested.
progressive publication.
It
But
has
the
to be.
Nation Institute did give me the grant that to pay for this.
Sodexo?
For Sodexo, because the ITT does not have a lot of money. In these times does not have a lot of money.
Seems to be these things would be of good use for people who read the Wall Street Journal or
Of course.
something. So there should be a room for that investigative
because-
look at the system, again, systemic.
Yes, because big corporations have cafeterias, and they're probably
course they
getting
do.
they're probably getting cheated.
Do you have any, let's say if you get rejection, you get pink slips or something for articles that are going to do that, do you get any pattern to the rationales, if there are any given, for why they reject the story for their
No.
publication,
Well,
the major financial reporting
Some of them
agencies?
say that they won't take an investigative story from the outside. But
Okay.
then, once it's printed, even in these times,
Yeah.
they don't go then and do it themselves. They
Right.
don't bring the story further themselves. Of course, that first answer is phony because they have.
The what answer?
If they say we won't buy it from outside,
Okay.
if you provide the documentation and
Right.
all of the sources, they could check them out.
Yeah.
So I could see that they would not take an outsider and just run their story with no checking.
Yeah, sure, of course. You
But
have to
once
fact
you have
check it.
collected all of the documentation and the interviews, and when I went to see the brothers, I taped their interviews. That's a phony response. One person.
Well, it is, yeah.
I
And
was
it,
once
it flies
told-
in the face of what's called a freedom of press.
Yeah.
You can be, if you got a freedom of press to report things that the people who are running the country like,
Yeah.
you haven't got very much freedom of the
Well-
press. Really, the freedom of press is supposed to be investigating the
It should
system
be.
and keeping it
It's
honest.
not. I was
They're not.
I was told by an editor.
They're bought like everybody else?
I don't
or-
think so.
No.
I was told by an editor at the Times, at the New York Times, we don't like to take outside investigative stories because our readers will say, "How come you didn't get the story?"
Well, oh,
I thought was pretty funny.
that's pretty rare, isn't it? Aren't most people in the journalism game interested in getting a scoop You call your thing the scoop.
It
It used
is
to
a
be that
scoop.
would be a thing by which you would sell newspapers or something.
I think so, but they.
And isn't there a market for?
I think so, but
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think
okay.
that
Big question.
I just don't know why. A lot. What I find in general is that the investigative, what you read in the papers that's investigative, very often is some local council person who has taken a bribe to give a contract for, for cleaning the, public place. It's small stuff.
Yeah, they keep
They
it
don't.
that way. Yeah.
It's not the institutional.
Keep it at the level people can understand.
But
they
it's
say.
not
Yeah.
the systemics.
No,
You're
that's
talking
what I'm
about
saying,
systemic.
yeah.
It's not the systemic
Well, look what they
corruption.
impeach a president for.
It's
They
not.
can pull off all kinds of wars and kill people and everything, but he gets impeached because he's got a cigar and a lady. It's absurd in a way.
So this, therefore, this is the problem that I have seen, that investigative reporting, for the most part, tends not to be systemic.
Right.
And that's the problem, because
That is the problem, yeah.
problems are systemic. Now,
Yeah.
let's go back to this case of Sodexo.
Okay, yeah.
This poor Jay, first he had been harassed by the company after he started making the complaints.
Right.
Finally, he was fired. He was fired not long after he had been nominated to be, manager of the year, which is very funny. Then they complained that he wasn't, he didn't do his job right. Then why was he nominated by
Right.
one of his superiors to be
Yeah.
manager of the year?
Right.
So I don't believe what they said about he didn't do his job right. They hassled him a lot. They then fired him. He went to work for a similar company, and he found out they were doing the same thing. When they went to Sodexo, the prices doubled for running the hospital cafeteria, and one of the executives said, "Well, I think we're having some slippage. Let's lock the cabinet so that the nurses don't get to the food." The nurses, they went for $5,000 to $10,000 in, I forget, was that a week or a month? But the nurses were not eating them. We're not eating the food. But this is the problem. He then got fired from that job. He wasn't going to do that. Couldn't get another job. He was obviously very depressed. He began to be treated by a psychiatrist. And 2 days ago, he had a knife and he stabbed the psychiatrist a number of times. She was
My Lord.
she was taken to the hospital in serious condition. I believe she will survive. But then he was shot dead by a security guard.
My gosh, that just happened a couple days ago.
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And I saw
This is
the
Thursday, 2 days ago. Yeah.
the videos and the newspaper reports, many of which use that picture.
Well, let me show the picture again. This is the fellow.
Yeah, some by the way, some with my permission and some without my permission. But now that we have the internet, you can check and see who's stealing your pictures. But the stories.
But this is the fellow who.
They got it.
This is the fellow who was shot.
That's Jay.
Yeah.
That was in his home, and his pictures of his kids are in the back.
Yeah, right. I can see. Yeah, babies and yeah.
Yes. So they in the story, they did not talk. They got the picture off my website. They did a Google and they found Jay Carciero, because that's where it is. It's on my website.
You took this picture?
I took the picture.
You took the picture. Good for
when I
you.
went to see him.
You should have video, right?
Yeah, I should have had
Yeah, you should have
video.
a
That
little
was a
bit.
mistake.
Listen, they got little video things. Let me tell you
I
something.
know
They
that.
got little
Next
things
time.
that are tiny.
I
You
know.
just set it up and it's
Next
crystal
time.
clear and it's audio.
Next time.
You
But-
should get it because it's
But I want to say is these articles.
video cameras in the courtyard.
This is this kind of story that the media likes, right?
Yeah.
Lots of blood.
Yeah, lots of
Blood,
Yeah.
death, violence. They didn't talk about the Sodexo part of the story. Somebody said, one place said something about that he was in litigation. But they didn't talk about the backstory. What brought this guy to that point?
They never do in a way. They don't
never
talk about it
the
in
major,
depth. Yeah.
the big, the three
think-
TV stations and the two major papers did not talk about this.
Do you think that's done because they have, from experience, know that any details is going to put the people into a swoon? They can't go into the details. They just want some bloody pattern. Where if it bleeds, it leads. That kind of thing that's been part of journalism.
I don't know.
Or is it more systemic that they are part of a system that they don't want to let people know about what the realities of the things systemically are.
I don't think
you know
it's
what
that.
I'm saying?
No, I don't.
It's not a conspiracy.
No,
of
it's not.
silence.
It's not
just
a conspiracy.
lazy, and it's
It's lazy. They want a simple story. This is. It's simple to
Headlines,
say
yeah.
he stabbed the doctor, and then he got shot. That's
Yeah.
easy.
And
if you want to talk about the fact that the man was under huge pressure, and I think it pushed him over the edge,
Yeah.
because he was a whistleblower in a case that involved kickbacks by a multinational, by a global company with billions of dollars in revenues, that I could say that in 2 or 3 paragraphs. But they don't want to say that even in a couple of paragraphs.
Better than that, I think you ought to get the rights. You ought to get yourself a good lawyer and so forth and all that for intellectual property rights, because just think for a second in terms of the way the public is, that kind of thing. If that story with all the nuance and all that that could be optioned as a film, a movie. You could have a movie with that. Who would play this fellow? There would
Harold,
be like,
I think
you know what I mean?
For the reason you just gave, maybe, but some of it is too complex. The stabbing comes at the end or at the beginning, and then there are flashbacks. But what about this complex story, which is a complex financial corruption
story? You ever
story?
see the Bourne thing, or some of these other films that get very complex? They got things where they include very complex things that investigate things, and it works as a movie.
Is there a movie maker out there?
Steven Spielberg, would you want to try and get an option on her? Make sure you get the option rights to that story if you can. I'm just suggesting, because people are going that way. You get that multimedia thing, and that's the way you get information. It just occurred to me off the blue and everything. Or a television, even a television outfit could do that to tell the story in a narrative way.
Yeah.
And it's really important stuff. I mean, we used to have novel writers to do that kind of thing.
It's important because it's systemic. It's not just one small case. It's part. I mean, this is kickbacks. One thing I have to add that's funny. I talked to the Deputy General Counsel at Sodexo. His name is Tom Morse, and he said the reason that we have to go with these very big companies is for safety. Well, safety because we want to be sure there's not foodborne illness.
Oh, health. Yeah, okay.
Now,
right. Okay.
So, this is very interesting. Let me tell you what I just very recently read about. There's a problem of E. coli bacteria.
With beef particularly, I understand.
With beef.
Yeah.
And there was a case a couple of months ago, in the summer, I guess, a Boy Scout camp, 21 people, probably most of them Boy Scouts, 27, in Goshen, Virginia. They were sickened by eating hamburgers that had been supplied by Sodexo. And the meat had come from Cargill, a huge
industrial farm. Yeah.
Yes.
Industrial.
And producer of food. There was a fascinating investigative story in the New York Times a week or so ago.
On that?
About how a woman had been sickened by beef from Cargill, and she's been made a paraplegic. I mean, she almost died. And
it can be very serious and deadly. It can be deadly. Yeah.
So the Times did an investigation, and here's where they can do some good things on this particular company, and they found that in order to save about 30 cents instead of the hamburger being sold for $1.30, they would sell it for $1.
That's a big markdown.
Instead of real beef. They were grinding up all kinds of scraps,
and adding it to the hamburger.
Well, that was it. That was practically it.
The Cargill was doing
it was called Cargill Slaughterhouse Trimmings. They were grinding up different grades of meat, the cheapest grades from various parts of the cow, and mixing it up with trimmings, and they were taking parts that were very vulnerable to E. coli contamination based on where the meat was.
That was in the Times?
That was in the Times.
That's another movie.
And these are from the areas of the cow more likely to make contact with feces. And that's what causes this. And they were grinding this up. And that's where Sodexo, that made a big fuss to me about how they had to get their supplies from big corporations for food safety. They got them from Cargill, and their clients, including 27 Boy Scouts, were made sick by the E. coli.
Wow.
So that shows that that's not why they're getting them from the big corporations. And the investigation found that some of these big companies, including Cargill, they were not having the supplies properly tested.
Right. Whatever happened to the Food and Drug Administration or health standards or something that can be, again, that's like, what do you call it, when the government regulation of the industry
we didn't
for
believe
public health.
Yes, that's right. Public health is
that all going by the board?
No, it has to do with the magic of the marketplace.
And it's all market fundamentals.
Right. If you die, you won't buy their hamburger anymore, will you?
Yeah, that's bad. You lose.
Right. If you die, or if your child dies or is crippled for life, you won't buy their ham. Well, that's very nice. That's great magic of the marketplace.
I'll tell you one thing on a movie thing. Then I've still got a very favored place in my bookshelf for you for The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. If you remember that book that just roiled a whole nation, you could get another story of that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
To get a thing that involves these things, and that had a huge effect that still roils, that still reverberates down the history of reporting.
And somebody like Jay Carciero was in a struggle against this company, getting the kickbacks, pretending it's because they need to have food safety, so they go to places like Cargill, which we know is not the case, and he ends up tragically being overcome by this struggle and erupting in violence and in dying.
Is there any chance that Cargill will be indicted, or that there will come up on charges, or something? Or is there going to be any follow-up on that, or do they just let them still keep grinding up the remainders or whatever?
Well, let's see what the Congress says about food safety.
Maybe the Congress is getting big payments from Sodexo in their pockets, as they are on every other issue. It seems.
See,
it's corrupt, the system.
It is corrupt.
Okay.
I don't know that. I'm sure Sodexo makes contributions, but I don't think there's been legislation even that addresses this issue. Now, another point, though, is these brothers complained to the attorneys general in New York, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts. What's happening?
Do the attorneys generals get bribes?
Oh, I don't know about that.
No, maybe I'm overstressing the fact that everything's run by a handful of people who have overwhelming power because they have so much money to be able to stuff it in people's pockets and buy their acquiescence.
Well, it's called campaign contributions, but I want to know what are these...
In the political realm, but in the general realm, everyone has to be sycophant if you want to have a chance to be in any institution that's established and run by the people that have all the ownership of all the capital, and we're like serfs on a feudal estate.
Well, it's very bad. Rather than get to your broader analysis of what is why this is all happening, let's say more specifically, what is the Attorney General of Massachusetts doing, and what is the Attorney General of Connecticut and of New York? What are they doing on Sodexo now that this is in the
press?
It's in the press again, not
in
the real
story. In the New
York
Times, did you say?
Well, there were small stories about Jay Carciero stabbing his doctor and being killed. That's what the story.
But that report was in the New York Times. Did you say it was in the New York Times?
Yes, but it was an AP story in everybody. It was in the it was in the San Francisco newspaper as well. It went all over the country.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was.
But it was.
I thought you said it was an investigative thing by the New York Times.
I'm sorry. The Cargill story.
Yeah. Well, that was with the beef.
That was in the New York Times. And it didn't focus on Sodexo at all. It focused on Cargill.
But there's a connection.
Well, because then I found in another story that the Boy Scouts had been sickened by Cargill beef that they got from Sodexo. So that was not in the Times. That was in another story.
Yeah, but there is
there is a connection.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's time to make the connections. It is. Yeah. So there are various things that need to be done.
Do you try to make connections between these things? If you get very deep, you get into a story, it's very like any one of those stories, I'm sorry, they could become blockbuster films. People would flock to see it on the silver screen if it had good acting and good, all of that kind of stuff, because they're inherently interesting. It's the jungle writ large in terms of multimedia and everything. But do you try to keep a pattern in terms of get patterns of the overall systemic thing. If you get too involved in, you could spend a whole lifetime investigating Stateko.
Yeah, no, I
like
I
a
wouldn't do that.
specialist in academics.
But what I focus on is the offshore system and the
Yes, you do.
financial system.
You're still following all of
and
that.
and that's big enough because that's the whole global skeleton.
Yes,
how
sir.
the money moves.
Yes, ma'am.
How
Yeah.
the money moves.
Right.
And I've gotten more into looking at the aspects that relate to the stock market as well, and to broader financial questions,
Yes.
not just the issue of derivatives. We'll
And
have
it's-
to talk another time about that.
Derivatives is swaps and derivatives is a whole nother thing.
But
That's a
these
huge
issues,
thing.
I mean, these people can understand a specific story, and that's why I like to focus on that, because otherwise it becomes a little dry for people, hard to understand.
You could become on frontliners. A report such as you're doing could be something that would investigate the people who put together Frontline. They put on very good stuff very often like that. They just did a thing on the whole financial system and that kind of thing and everything. And so do you have faith? We only got a couple minutes left. Do you have faith? Mr. Obama says he's going to try and address it. Some people say we're going to address it. We know it should be addressed, these large issues on that large pattern. What's your sense? Do you think we're going to get anywhere with this, or do you think it's just a way for various people to continue making money and that kind of thing and accepting the system without fundamental change? Is there any hope for fundamental change to get universally inclined justice movement in the world?
Fundamental, I don't think I'd go that far.
Okay.
I think we're talking about incremental changes.
Okay.
And if we get some of that, it's better than nothing, except
Yeah.
I think that if there were too many compromises made on the financial reform,
Yeah.
that we'll run into the same problem.
Right.
We'll run into lack of control over institutions that are bigger than our government.
Yeah, bigger than our
And
government.
so we have to see
I
what.
mean, they're too big to fail in that large sense.
Yeah, and they're in control. I mean,
They're in
they
control.
keep putting more Goldman Sachs people in positions of power, and that worries
Do
me.
you ever feel like we're in a situation rather like the feudal estate with the lord in the castle and everybody are just serfs, and there's a few people who own all the assets, they're overwhelmingly wealthy, and we're just all serfs on their estate picking up their leaves?
Well,
Leavings, maybe? Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Probably the people picking up the leavings are the desperately poor in places like Africa and some Asian countries.
Well,
I think it's more complex than that. But I think that part of the problem is that the media is so corporately controlled that
as is everything else.
that it's used for bread and circuses.
Yeah.
So people don't even get the truth about what is going on.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get those stories out.
But not only the media, everything else is. The institutions are all set on financial terms. You got 3 companies that run all the media now. It used to be 55. There was some competition. Now it's all concentrated. Some people own all the assets. They have they just get overwhelmingly wealthy. They set the template. Everybody else has to set into that template. If they want to get any story involved or anything, they have to be sycophant to that power structure. And the power structure doesn't have a vision that's going to be able to bring the kind of transformation that would be necessary in order to bring universal patterns of justice to the vast majority of the people of the world. We don't have a vision. Do we lack vision in our political or economic or intellectual leadership worthy of what the future requires?
Yeah, the problem.
We only got a minute left.
Yeah, the problem is we, to be trite and to use a cliche, we have the best Congress that money can buy.
Yeah.
Until we do real finance reform, campaign finance
That's it,
reform,
yeah.
we're not going to change that significantly. And sometimes I hope that perhaps the internet is a way to circumvent the corporate media, just to a small extent. That
and
may
maybe
be.
inform them, maybe. And I would say once again, the best place for you to go in the internet or anywhere else is the Commissar Scoop. TheCommissarScoop.com. The best reporting in all of these areas can be found there, and I congratulate you enormously on all the beautiful work we didn't get to when you were on civil rights down in Mississippi in 1962, fighting that good